All right, here in exposure controls, we have got a lot of information to cover. We'll be talking about the whole mode dial. We'll talk about setting shutter speeds and apertures ISOs in various different ways. We'll talk about some other tools for getting just the right exposure, like exposure compensation, adjusting the metering, and doing some bracketing. So lots of the most important controls on the camera are going to be in this section right here. We're going to start with the mode dial. Big dial on the top of the camera, and this is how shutter speeds and apertures are controlled. There's a lot of different options on here, and we're going to go through all of them. Now, first up, there is the basic zone, and there is the creative zone, where you have more manual control. When you are set to any of the items in the basic zone, there is going to be a limited menu that is available to you. When you go into the creative zone, you have the full option of all the menu items in the camera. So be aware that if you are using the camera in those basic areas, not all the features that I talk about later on in this class will be visible to you. All right, so we have a lot of different ways of setting the exposure on this camera, and there's a lot of good reasons because there's a lot of different people with a lot of different needs. And we're just going to go through them one by one, starting with the easiest and going a little bit more manual as we go along the way. First up is the Scene Intelligent Auto. This is the A+ mode. This is the full automatic mode that also has a bit of child safety locks in the fact that it has a limited menu in here. Now, on the back of the camera, there will be a touch focus option, so you can just choose which area of the frame that you would like to focus on by touching it. It is also face and subject detection by default. And so it's automatically going to kind of go into that particular mode. Now, the Scene Intelligent Auto, what this really means is that the camera is going to look at the scene as you have it framed up, and it's going to decide whether it's a portrait, if it's a close-up, it's a sunset, and then it's going to make some subtle changes to make that a better photograph because it knows what's going on. Now, my experience with this is that this is a pretty good mode for somebody who doesn't know what they're doing with the camera, is not real familiar with photography. The camera will make some adjustments. Now, the camera is not making any adjustments that you can't do yourself manually in some other way. In fact, I think if you know what you're doing, you can actually do a better job than the camera can do. But if you're going to hand the camera to a neighbor, a friend, a relative, something like that, and you want them to take good basic photos, well, this would be the first start to showing how that might work. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. We're going to get the camera set up here. We're going to turn the mode dial to the fully automated mode. And you can see on the back of the camera, it says Scene Intelligent Auto. You can press down with the cross keys for more information. It tells you a little bit more. And then you can just press the shutter release to kind of go into a regular mode here. Now, you'll notice that the focusing point is looking at the portrait here and is locking onto the eyes. As I said, by default, it is choosing faces to focus on. We can press the info button and we can get a little bit more information here. I'm just going to hit OK, not worry about this screen here. And you can see that it has identified a portrait by the icon in the top left corner. If we zoom in on something that isn't a portrait, you can see it just goes back into the standard A+ mode. We bring the portrait back in, it's looking and it's trying to decide whether it's a portrait or a backlit portrait. Look, it thinks it's a backlit portrait now. And so as you can see, the camera will automatically change the setup of the camera ever so slightly, kind of behind the scenes, according to what you have your camera pointed at. And so easy mode, not where a lot of people are going to be using this particular camera, in my opinion. You didn't spend all this money to do everything automatic, did you? Probably not. All right, now on the back of the camera, you do have some touchscreen controls, and this is something we'll be talking about throughout this class. And in the A+ mode, we've got a lot of child safety locks on, and there is very few options of what you can change. You can change image quality, drive mode, and the shutter. Let's go ahead and take a look and show you how that works. So here on the back of the camera, there are some things that we can touch and allow us to change, and they are these main controls in the lower left of the screen here. So we can turn on the touch shutter, which enables us to touch the image and it will fire the shutter for us. We can turn that off, disabled, so now It is simply acting as a focusing area right there. The next box is our drive box. We could set it into continuous shooting. So if we wanted to shoot through photos more quickly, it would do that like that. I'm going to change it back to the single shot mode there. And as you can see, it kind of times out, or you can press this return button up here in the corner. And we've already talked about the file format here, but if you want to come in here and change those, you can do so as well in there. So that is the touch screen, and we will talk more about it as we go through this class. Now, the quick menu is going to be, or the quick button, I should say, is going to give us access to our Creative Assist when we are in this mode. And this is where we can go in and we can kind of have some fun with post-production software built right into our camera on an image. And so I'm going to wait on this for just a moment because we have another section where we're going to go into this as well. But this is another way that you can go in and play with your images and adjust it. And this is going to be on JPEG images only. Next up is Special Scene. Now, to get to the different scenes, you're going to press the Q button, which is kind of our default quick menu button on the camera. And you can choose a bunch of different options. In the Scene Intelligent mode, the camera was choosing for you which mode it was going to be in. And as you saw, it might change depending on the scenario. In this case, you get to specifically set it to a particular one. So let's go ahead and let's make the change on the top of the camera to the scene mode. So now we're in the scene mode on the top. We can see it on the back as well. We can press down for more information, up for less. We're going to press the set button to enter here. And now we can go up and down and we can choose different modes to be in. And the camera is going to change shutter speeds and apertures ever so slightly. So if we said this was a landscape shot, we can take a look in here. It's choosing 160th of a second at f5.6. If we were to change this into the portrait mode, let's see if it says anything different. It actually chooses f5.0. So it slightly changed it just a little bit there. Now, as you can see by pressing the Q button, this allows us to go into this different screen here, which allows us to change a bunch of different settings, all of which we'll talk about as we get through the class. The first one here is the different scenes that are available here. I'm not going to go through each one of these. This is something that might be fine for you to play around with, but it's not an area that gives you a lot of manual control. So we're going to keep it short and sweet on the scene section in here. Now, one thing I do want to note is that there is a mode or an option, a scene called silent shutter. And it sounds really good if you are in, say, a music hall or someplace where you need it to be very, very quiet. And it's going to generally work out just fine for you. Be aware, though, if you are shooting subjects that are moving around real quickly, you are very possibly going to get distortion with that movement. It also may not work well under certain types of LED lighting. There may be some banding and it may not work real well. And this is because the camera is using an electronic shutter, which is something I'll explain about in an upcoming section, I believe section 5 on the drive. And so just be aware that that one is kind of a funny one. We do have a panoramic mode, which I haven't had that in too many Canon cameras. And this is where you pan the camera and the camera will shoot multiple individual photos and put them together for you in one image. This works quite well as a snapshot image. I wouldn't think of it as a professional shot image because the way that it merges these images, it tends to be a little bit clunky and is not as good as post-production software. So if you're trying to do this professionally, it is not a shortcut to doing that. It is kind of nice when you get a big wide panorama vista and you just want to have a basic memory of it. You're not too worried about the precision that the camera puts things together at. It can do an okay job at it, but it is a bit limited from what I have seen. Next up is something called the creative filters. And so this is Instagram filters or Photoshop built into your camera. This is where you can have the camera do some really wacky and very different looking things. So this is a way that you can be creative by choosing a preset standard. Guess so. In any case, there's a lot of different and unique options in here. And if you are wanting to get something different out of camera, straight out of the camera without a computer, well, this is one of the ways you can do it. Grainy black and white can be a great way to shoot a number of images. There is a soft focus. Probably work better on a portrait person than my landscape shot here, but you get the idea. The fisheye effect mimics the distortion that you would get with a fisheye lens without getting the extreme wide angle of view, which is part of the fun, but you know, it's built in, so what do you expect? The water painting effect, well, that's got its own special look to it in itself, doesn't it? Yeah. And if you want your very expensive nice camera to look like a very cheap toy camera effect, well, you can do that in camera as well. There is a miniature effect, which looks a little bit better when you're shooting from a higher angle and shows a limited depth of field by blurring out of focus stuff that would normally be in focus. We also have a high dynamic range option where it shoots multiple photos, combines it, and then does something creative with the colors and saturation so that you get kind of a unique look to it, which can give you something that is very distinctive and different, that is for sure. All right, so let's take a look at these modes. We're going to put our cameras into this creative filter option. Once again, we can go down for more info, up for less. We're going to hit the set button in here, and now we can choose different modes in here. So let's choose that fisheye mode. I think that's kind of a weird and wacky one right here. So I'm going to select this and I'm going to press OK, and you can see it's distorted our image here. Now if I press the set button again, it goes to this quick menu screen and I can select through a number of different options. Now a lot of these things are standard photography related things that we can change, but this second item here, this is the effect level. And so we can choose kind of a low, a medium, or a high effect level on that particular feature. Now I could go in and change the feature here, and let's do our soft focus effect. And it's choosing soft focus effect, but if I hit the Q button again, I can come back down and I can taper this down to low, standard, and high setting here. So most of these, I don't know that all of them have this multiple setting in here. They're all going to work a little bit differently and when you come in here, and so you have to hit that Q button twice. In this case, it does not have that particular option in there. And so realize that there are changes depending on what you're doing. See the grainy black and white one, hit the Q button again. Now you can go to this filter effect and you can have it low, standard, or high. And so this, once again, is all in the creative filters option. So something to play around with, I would say, on your own time. I think there's a lot of goofy things in here. And if you're new to photography, it is kind of fun to get these quick and easy out of camera. But if it is an important shot, be very careful about this because it is very hard to fix one of these shots later on if you've shot this in a JPEG and you're just getting this goofy, fun little image out of it. All right, now we're going to start getting into the more serious stuff. Now, the first one on the dial is actually a more advanced feature, and I'll talk a little bit about this, but this is something that you might want to come back to after you've heard the rest of this talk in here about shutter speeds and apertures. It depends on how familiar you are with photography. What flexible value is it's kind of a new concept mode. It is kind of like having manual, shutter priority, aperture priority, and program all in one mode, and you can just selectively turn one thing on and off rather than turning the dial on the camera. Now, the way this works is that you're going to use that back dial, the quick control dials, to select which setting you want to adjust, and then you'll use the main dial to adjust that particular setting. Now, one of the options for each of the different settings is automatic. So if you want to set a particular shutter speed, you can do that, or you can have the camera set to automatic shutter speeds. And you can select this and create kind of any combination you want very quickly. And so it's another way of having full manual, aperture value, time value, or program in kind of one mode that you just leave there all the time in that flexible value mode. Now, the garbage can button, strange that this is being used in here, but it is. This is a shortcut way to turn a particular feature automatic, or you can hold it and have everything turned automatic. Now, if this seems at all confusing, yeah, it did to me at first as well. So let's go through and put our cameras in the flexible value mode on the top. And let's go ahead and dive in here. So currently, we are going to be using this back dial to change through the 4 different options. So you can see that I can't get to the exposure compensation because everything's manual. So I can select my shutter speeds here, and you can see the image getting brighter and darker. And the same thing's going to happen when I adjust the aperture. And you can see that I move the aperture down to automatic. If you go down to the lowest setting and go one more, it's in automatic. And now that gives me access to exposure compensation. So I can set this as brighter or darker than normal. I'm going to bump up the ISO to 800 just for the studio lights here. We'll go to a 60th of a second. That's pretty a normal setting. Let's manually set our aperture. This looks a little too bright. And if I just wanted to get a straight up exposure right here, that seems like a pretty good place to do it. Now let's say I wanted the ISO at auto. I could come over to ISO and I could dial it down to the lowest setting, 100, and go one step further. Actually, nope, doesn't do it there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the garbage can button, and that automatically puts it in auto. It doesn't say it, but it is in auto. And if I want to dial over to the shutter speeds, I can press the garbage can button, and it's got an underline underneath it, which means it's in auto. Now, if I want to do that for the aperture, I will press it here, and now it actually says it's an auto rather than reading something else out. And so the camera is in a full program mode. I'm going to switch it back to manual real quick. So aperture's in manual, ISO is in manual, and shutter speed is now in manual. If I press and hold the garbage can button for about 2 seconds, they all put an underline underneath them, and they're all in automatic. So this is a mode that definitely feels a little weird and a little strange when you first get into it, but once you get used to it, for some people, this is going to be the great mode. This is the mode of the future, I think, for a lot of photographers. It just quickly allows you to turn one thing on and off without turning the dial. And it's just a different way of working, and it's going to be really good for some people. All right, now that we're into these more serious modes, there is a quick menu that gives you access to, well, it's a shortcut menu of the most important features in the camera. And I want to show you real quickly because there is a couple of differences that we're going to be talking more about later on in the class. And so right now, when we press the quick menu, you can see that we've gotten these 2 columns on either side. Now, your camera may or may not have that, depending on the info button. You see, the info button cycles through different information. And this is actually kind of the standard quick menu. And when you press the quick button here, you can dial through and make changes to any of these particular settings. And there's a lot of options in here, and you can adjust, like so, different settings in here. And so this is the standard quick menu. But by pressing the info button and changing the displays that you see, when you get this is actually a customizable quick menu. It doesn't have as many items in here, but it is something that you can customize. And we'll talk more about this later on in the class. And so hit that info button to cycle through the different modes on your camera, the viewing modes on the screen, and you can either have the quick menu, the standard one, or the customizable one, whatever one you prefer at this point. But this will allow you quick changes to the autofocus, the drive, the metering, other features that we'll all be talking about as we work our way through the class. All right, the program mode. This has been around for a long time. Program is where the camera sets shutter speeds, apertures, and nothing else. And so you're in charge of ISO. It is a little like that A+ Scene Intelligent mode, except for the fact that you do get to set ISO. The camera doesn't recognize portraits or landscapes or anything like that, so it's not going to be adjusting settings like that on you here. And it doesn't have the child safety lock. So if you want to get into anything in the menu system, you can do it from the program mode. So for you and I, the program mode is probably the least serious, the most automated mode that we would want to go into because we're going to want to be able to get in and make all sorts of changes on it. And so when you hand the camera to your brother who doesn't know about work on the camera, then you can put it in the A+ mode. When you just want it easy, you put it in the P mode. So in the P mode, camera is going to set shutter speeds and apertures, and the program that is built in, it's designed to give you a fast enough shutter speed for hand holding the camera. So it's always defaulting to a faster shutter speed. If you're on a tripod, not the right mode to use. It works, but it's not the best mode. And so this is going to be good for just general hand holding photography. Now, you can look through the viewfinder and you will see kind of over on the lower left side, your shutter speeds and your apertures. And you want to kind of keep an eye on this because this is something that you can adjust by turning the main dial on the camera. This is called program shift. So let's go ahead and take a look on our camera here. And we can see that when I turn my camera to the program mode, right now, the camera is choosing, and I'm just going to bump up the ISO so we've got a little bit more room to work with here. I'm going to set it to 1600. So right now the camera is at 1/160th of a second at f7.1, and that's fine for a basic photo. But if I wanted to adjust this to have shallower depth of field, well, at least with this lens, I can go down to f5. If I wanted more depth of field, I could go down to f20, 22. Skips it, goes right to 25. So in this case, I'm down at a 15th of a second. So if I don't like the numbers I'm getting, I can just simply change that setting with the main dial on the camera, and I could take multiple versions of it if I want. And so this is the program shift feature, which allows you to tailor the settings to the exact situation that you have. So it's very quick to work with the program shift and still get the settings that you want. Now, the quick control dial on the back of the camera controls exposure compensation, which is the brightness of your image. So very quickly, by turning the dial, you can set it to shoot on the minus side if you want something a little bit darker, or you can set it over on the plus side if you want something a little bit brighter than the camera is giving you. Because remember, in the program mode, the camera is figuring out your exposure. It's determining what your exposure looks like. This just tells you that you can adjust it brighter or darker. The program shift allows you to actually shift the shutter speeds and aperture, so it does give you quite a bit of manual control in here. And so let's just take a quick look at this one here. So whenever we're in the program mode, the camera by default wants to give you an even exposure no matter what's in the frame in there. It brightens up, darkens things, changes the shutter speed. If we want something a little bit brighter, we can dial off to the right-hand side. We can dial off to the left if we want something a little bit on the darker side. And you want to be careful because this can get easily bumped. And there are ways to prevent that with a lock switch here on the top, but it is something that you do need to be aware of because, well, we've all had the camera get bumped a little bit and then have that off for a few more photos than it was supposed to be. All right, next up is the time value mode. This is called shutter priority by most other companies out there, but time value here means that you are in charge of setting the time or the shutter speed, and the camera will figure out the aperture. You're still setting ISO on your own. Now, this could be handy if you are shooting something that is moving very, very quickly, bird in flight where you want 1,000th of a second, or perhaps you want a very slow shutter speed where you want to get that flowing water look at a 1 second exposure. Now you do want to make sure that your camera has an appropriate aperture, because if you don't have an appropriate aperture, it is going to blink at you. And anything blinking is a warning that something may be going wrong. Let's take a look at this time value mode and show you this. So if I turn it to the time value mode up here on the mode dial, on the back it shows you a little bit about the time value mode, what it's used for. And in here, if we adjust our main dial, we can see we get different shutter speeds. Let's just say we're at 1/8 of a second and we press down on the shutter release. The camera is choosing f29 given the lighting in here and the fact that I'm at ISO 1600. As I select faster and faster shutter speeds, the aperture starts falling down. And if I select, say, 1,000th of a second, the camera is going to blink f5.0. It will allow me to shoot a photograph, and if I play this photograph back here, we can see that this is a very dark photograph. And that is because the camera allows me to take control and fire it as I wanted to at 1,000th of a second. But once again, if we look on the back of the camera, we can see it's blinking at us, which means it's a warning, don't do it. It's too dark. I don't have an aperture bright enough to shoot under this condition. And so it's up to you if you want to override that, or you can dial it back so that it is not a blinking aperture. There is an available aperture for that setting. So it's a pretty good mode, but you do need to be careful when you are using it. Now, when you are using it, you can also use the exposure compensation dial as we talked about in the previous section, so that works pretty much exactly the same. All right, the next mode is aperture value. So aperture value is when you want to set the aperture yourself. Perhaps you want to have everything in focus from the foreground to the background and you want to stop down to f22. Well, you can do so here. If you want it wide open because you want really shallow depth of field, you got one of those lenses that opens up really bright like an f1.4 lens. Well, set it here and get a really shallow depth of field. Now, it does in theory have the same problem as the time value mode, is that you may have an issue that you don't have an available shutter speed in theory, but in reality, there are so many shutter speeds, it is unlikely to ever happen. So we're going to switch our cameras into the aperture value mode, aperture priority also known as. You can see the aperture is currently at 5.6 with a little orange dial representing the main dial of the camera. So if we want to change that setting, we turn this. We can stop it all the way down to f29, we get 1/10 of a second. We can open it up at f5.0, we have 1/400th of a second. So we have more than enough shutter speeds to cover all of the available apertures that we have set here. So set it up, shoot it, and you're good. And as I said before, you can adjust the back dial, the quick control dial, here represented in orange on the back, to lighten or darken your image if you want. So I really like the aperture priority mode just because you don't hit any sort of limit where the camera is going to be kind of out of range, you might say, with an available shutter speed. There's lots of shutter speeds. There's a limited number of apertures. So this is a good mode to be in when you want to make some pretty significant changes very quickly and easily. But my favorite mode is full manual. This is where you set shutter speeds and apertures yourself. Side note, of course, you are doing ISO yourself. That's kind of a separate topic we'll get to in a moment. Shutter speeds are done with the main dial, apertures are done with the back dial, and then you just need to pay attention to the light meter. And I like manual exposure because I like shooting different types of shots very quickly under the same lighting to get different photos. And you get consistent results from your lighting by changing your zoom and moving your position around with all my shutter speeds and apertures set up. Another reason I like manual exposure is under tricky lighting, when the metering systems in the camera just don't completely understand what you are doing with the camera because you're working under bright light or low light or some other unusual situation. And so whether you want consistent lighting or dealing with tricky lighting, manual exposure is a great way to deal with things if you have just a little bit of time to consider and think about what you're doing. Now, it's very important that you're going to be working with the viewfinder exposure indicator. So this is going to tell you whether you're underexposed, overexposed, or evenly exposed. Now this is broken up into stops and third stops so that you can be very precise about where your readings are. And so in some cases, you may want to be one stop overexposed. If you're a stop and 2/3 over, you're going to be quite a bit brighter. When things get really dark, you might just see an arrow pointing off to the side, which means that you are more than 3 stops away from an even exposure. Generally speaking, you want to get the camera set to an even exposure for your first shot, and then depending on the brightness of your subject, you may want to have it a little bit brighter or a little bit darker, depending on what you want and what your situation requires for that particular scenario. So pay very close attention to that light meter because that is something that you're going to be working with and is very important here in the manual mode. So let's go ahead and set up a manual exposure. We'll start by turning the camera to the manual mode on the mode dial on the top of the camera. Now, in here, I'm sensing a bit of a problem right now. Our image seems a little on the bright side, shall we say. We've got an arrow over here on the right-hand side that you see times out after a few seconds. The screen is also really bright, so that's how we know. So there's a couple different ways. Now, we can adjust our shutter speeds by turning the main dial on the top of the camera, or we can adjust apertures with the back dial on the camera. Now, let's just say we wanted to set this aperture to f8. I would then adjust my shutter speed to the middle range right here, and so we're at f8, 160th of a second, and I can take my photo and I'm getting an even exposure here. Now I might say in this particular case, you know what, this table is white and that cabinet is white. Maybe we should overexpose by 2/3 of a stop, and I think that's correct. That's okay too. And so that is just manually overexposing or underexposing according to the needs that you have at that time. So manual exposure is very easy to work with and easy to adjust. Highly recommend it for everyone for a lot of different things, but not necessarily everything. Now, bulb is kind of a special manual mode. It is designed for long exposures. And the main dial as well as the quick control dial are going to control your apertures. So in this case, if you want to leave the shutter open, say for a minute in time to do light painting with the headlights from cars, you would put it in the bulb mode. Now, the way the bulb mode works is when you press down on the shutter release, that is going to control how long the shutter remains open. So it is a shutter speed controlled by your finger. And you can leave it open for a second or a minute or an hour. That wouldn't be real comfortable. Don't recommend it because you might be jiggling the camera during the time. But this is the basic bulb mode for nighttime photography. Now you can go into shooting menu 7 and you can specify how long you want the bulb to remain open, bulb timer on it. And you can set it for 30 seconds or 55 seconds or a minute or whatever number you want. That way you don't have to time it, count it, or deal with it yourself. Now the best way to do bulb is with a cable release. That way you're not actually touching the camera. This camera has 3 different types of remotes or releases that you can use. You can use a wired one, an infrared one, or a Bluetooth one. So whatever choice you want to make is fine here for doing bulb exposures, but if you're going to do a lot of nighttime exposures, I would definitely recommend one of these 3 options. All right, finally we get to the custom mode. So there is custom 1, 2, and 3, and this is a preset favorite the way you like things to work. Now there's a lot going on in the camera, and when you change from one style of photography, say landscape photography, to doing portrait work, there's a lot of things that you might want to change beyond just the exposure. You might want to change focusing, metering, drive modes, and other things in the camera. And it might mean 10, 15 different changes in the camera. And that takes quite a while. And when you quickly want to switch, what you can do is you can set your camera up the way you want in 3 specific styles of shooting with as many changes as you want in the camera. And then you can go in and tell the camera to memorize those settings as custom 1, 2, or 3. And then when you go out to shoot, you can quickly switch it to number 1 for whatever you have set for number 1, and then quickly switch to 2 or 3. So let me show you real quickly on how this works. So first off, if I just turn it into custom right now, it's in a program mode, just a basic shooting mode. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put my camera in the aperture priority mode, and I'm going to dial in an aperture of, let's see, f16, and I'm going to change my ISO down to ISO 100. And I know I'm doing some things I haven't talked about yet, but that's okay. We'll talk about this. And I'm going to put the self timer on its 2-second self timer. So this is kind of a landscape mode for me. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive into the menu, and I am going to go all the way over to setup menu number 6. And I am going to go into the custom shooting mode, and I'm going to press set. And I want to register those particular settings into custom shooting mode C1. And I'm going to press set. And I'm going to confirm that this is what I want to do. And that is all set up into custom mode number 1 now. Now I'm going to turn off some of these things that I did. I had the self timer, I had that, and then I think I had the ISO. I'm going to go back up to 1600 here. And I was in aperture priority, but now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the camera back into the C1 mode, and you can see it's in aperture priority. And let's see if I can pull up some more information on screen here. Let's see, we have the ISO of 100 set. And if I was to look at the drive mode, I would see that I'm in the 2-second self-timer mode, and the 2-second self-timer mode is indeed working here. So that is my landscape mode. Now I'd probably go in and actually do some other changes in there, but just to get the idea to you, you set up the camera the way you want. go in, set it as custom shooting mode 1, 2, or 3, and then you can quickly change those. Now, there is an option that you can turn on or off called auto update setting. So in that particular mode I had the camera set at ISO 100. Now, what if I was needing to change it to ISO 200 while I was in that mode? Do I want that to update my preset, or is it just kind of a one-time change? And this is really going to depend on how you shoot in the custom modes. Sometimes I can see that you always want it updating that particular mode to whatever you set the camera to, and that's just your new default. For somebody else who really has something nailed down as the way they want it and they only make changes for temporary things, you wouldn't want to turn that particular mode on. So that is kind of an interesting feature and option within the custom shooting modes. So some very good options. Encourage you to think about some types of shooting that you do that you would like to be able to quickly change the camera to, so that you don't have to worry about changing several different settings in the camera. So there is your mode dial and all of the different features on it. So hopefully now you got a better idea of which modes you're going to spend the most time with. Don't worry about using all of them. I know there are likely to be features on here that you're raising your eyebrows at and you're wondering, who would use this? This is the craziest thing. And there's somebody right next door to you who's saying, this is the greatest mode ever. A lot of options for a lot of different types of photographers. All right, so that is the mode dial. Important way of controlling the exposure on the camera. All right, next up is the ISO button. Welcome back, ISO button. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, for a long time, Canon put an ISO button up on the top of their camera right near the shutter release, and it was an easy way to just quickly jump in and change the ISO. And a lot of us got very, very used to that. It was nice to have. And then they changed it to that multi-function button I've talked a little bit about, we'll talk more about later on. And they says, okay, well, ISO is here and you can get to some other stuff if you want. But it's kind of nice just to have a dedicated ISO button, because this is a feature that photographers adjust quite frequently. And so now we have one that is really dedicated just to ISO. Fact is, you can also get it through the multi-function button and in the menu. So there's a lot of different ways to get to the ISO option. So ISO is the sensitivity of the sensor. And so if you are shooting under low light conditions, it can amplify the signal and brighten the image and allow you to shoot under lower light conditions. So let's take a look at the different options, because when you shoot at higher ISOs, you get more noise, which kind of looks a little like grain and degrades the image quality. So if you want the best image quality, you set ISO, of course, to ISO 100. Fantastic quality on this camera. In fact, 2, 4, 800 is all very good. It starts to be noticeable a little bit at 1600. As you dive into the higher numbers, of course, we're going to see more noise depending on how closely you're looking at your images. So you tend to want to be shooting at these higher ISOs like 6400 and higher, less so. You don't get as clean and as smooth as information, but this is on my standard check to see how good it looks. And I think pretty much everything 3200 and below is looking pretty good, depending on your standards and use for that particular setting. Now, as I said, ISO, dedicated button, fantastic, that's great. But ISO can also be adjusted by the multi-function button. And so the first item in there is the ISO. And this was pretty nice on other cameras, because if you didn't change the multi-function to do drive or focus or something like that, whenever you press the button, ISO was the first item in there, and it was basically an ISO button. So you can see it and adjust it in there. So adjust it if you want right in there. You can choose the function with the quick control dial on the back of the camera, and then you can adjust the actual setting with the main dial on the camera. Now in your menu, something we'll talk more about later on, there is the ISO speed settings. And in here you can set your specific speed, which is kind of what we're doing with the button on the outside. You can choose the range. And so if you're wondering why your camera doesn't go to that H setting, the 51,200, that's because you need to dive into the menu and adjust the range that your camera will allow you to set. I don't know why Canon doesn't want you to go there, but you can, and you're welcome to anytime you need to. Wouldn't recommend it. It's not very great ISO setting, but sometimes it's necessary in extreme situations. You can also adjust your ISO range and your minimum shutter speed, which is something we'll talk more about when we get into the menu settings for the ISO speed setting there. But there's more to come on that. All right, metering. Metering is very important. This is how your camera reads light, and this camera doesn't have a direct button for it, so you can navigate to it through the quick menu. And so you can select different options in there. And so let me show you, just in case you missed it, how to get to it. So it doesn't really matter what mode you're in, but I'm just going to go to aperture value just to be in the simple mode here. Metering. We're going to go into the quick menu, press the Q button, and we can navigate up and down through these different options here. And this is the customizable quick menu. And right down here is your metering mode. If you were to have this set up like this screen here, you would press the Q button and you can navigate left, right, up, down, and right here is your metering option, and you can press the set button to go in there, and then you can select the different options in here. And so there's a couple different ways to get to it depending on what screen you have activated with your info, as you can cycle through the different options. So let's look at the different options we have in here. First up is evaluative metering. This is where the camera breaks the scene up into 384 zones. It measures the lightness, the darkness, got a special algorithm, and it basically gives you a pretty good exposure reading in most all situations. And this is where I leave my camera pretty much all the time. This is where most people who shoot Canon leave it all the time because it does a pretty good job. Now, there is another option called partial metering, where it measures a smaller area of the frame, about 6% of the viewfinder, very heavily. So if you wanted to just read the light in a small area and not have the camera distracted by bright or dark areas in other parts of the frame, then this is a good option. If you want to be very precise, then you would look at spot metering, which is looking at only 3% of the viewfinder. And once again, is handy when you have a subject that has a background that is really bright or really dark. And then finally, we have center weighted average. This is kind of an old school way of metering, which is just kind of everything in the middle of the frame, and it doesn't pay attention to the corners of the frame. And so there are different ways of working for different types of photographers, but I will have to say that the evaluative metering is pretty darn good in a lot of situations, and so you're probably pretty safe leaving it there most of the time. Now, making sure you have the correct exposure can be done in the playback mode or using something called a histogram. So histogram is a graph showing you the tonal range of all the light coming in the camera. Now, this can be turned on and off by pressing the info button. You can do this live while you are shooting images so that you can actually see how much range, what's the brightest thing, what's the darkest thing in the frame. Now, this histogram can be adjusted by going into shooting menu number 9. You can have a brightness histogram, or you can have an RGB histogram, which separates out the color channels, which I kind of like because it's nice and colorful. But it's also to see whether one of the channels is overexposing or underexposing. And this gives you some great information in the viewfinder or on the monitor of the back of the camera. Now, real quickly on histograms, if it's piled up to the left, it's underexposed, and if it's piled up to the right, it's probably overexposed. But each picture has its own unique fingerprint look to it and its unique histogram. So don't judge a book by its cover and just say everything's supposed to be right in the middle. It really depends, and this is something you'll learn more about as you get more into photography. Now, this can be done in the playback mode. It can also be done in live view. So if you hit playback, you can press the info button to cycle through the different options, and you can get yourself to the histogram in there. And so if you want to get additional information, you can go up and down with the little joystick, and that will bring up additional information on the histogram. So we'll talk more about that when we talk about the play features of the camera. All right, auto exposure lock. So the AEL button, which has traditionally on Canon cameras been the asterisk button, is a way of doing auto exposure lock. And this is if you want to lock the exposure when you're in one of the automated modes like aperture priority, shutter priority, and program mode. And so it will lock the exposure as you move from one scene to the next. But it also does an exposure difference. So let me show you what both of these things do. All right, so let's allow you to see what's going on here. So I have the camera in aperture priority. Let's dial it down aperture-wise to f5.6 here. That sounds pretty good. All right, so we're at 1/250th, 1/320th of a second, depending on where things are right now. Now, if I zoom in and I kind of look at this dark area of the frame over here, you can see the camera has dropped down to 125th, 100th, the 60th of a second. It kind of depends on what the camera is pointing at as to what its recommended shutter speed is there. Now, let's say I just want to lock in this 1/250th of a second. I'm going to press this asterisk button. You can see the asterisk comes up over here. And now you can see that when I pan over here, it's locked in at 2/50th of a second. Once again, if I just let the camera do its own thing, it's going to drop down. Actually, it's still activated there. I'm going to let it time out, which should just take a moment there. And now that it's timed out, as it goes into darker areas, it'll go down to those darker shutter speeds. All right. Now, let's go ahead and flip the camera into the manual mode. And now this is going to show you our exposure difference. So let's set up our aperture at f8, and we're going to adjust our shutter speed. And we're going to say that this is where we want it, 1/160th of a second. Now let's say we point the camera over here. Actually, we're going to have to lock that in here. So let's lock it in with the asterisk button. And we move over here. You can see it's getting darker, and it's showing you that it's 2 stops darker right there. Or let's go back. It only holds it in there for a relatively short period of time, which can be adjusted. So I lock it in there and I move it over, and I can see how much difference the brightness is from that original reading. And so if you want to take a manual reading and then readjust it, you can do so in that manner. All right, next up is exposure bracketing. If you are not sure about the correct exposure, you can do a bracket series. And this is where the camera automatically shoots through photos of different brightness values. Now in here, you can set it up for shooting 3 stops, 2 stops, or a full stop apart, or even in 3rd stop increments. Depends on how wide a range the lighting scenario is in your particular situation. Now, this doesn't work in manual because you're adjusting everything yourself. And so this is going to be best used in the program mode, time value, and aperture value. But my preference is to put it into the aperture value mode. And that's because you probably want to have the camera on a tripod. You probably don't want to be shooting anything that moves because you're going to be taking multiple shots. And if it moves, it's going to be in different places and look different. So this is really designed for landscape work, maybe architectural, still photography, things that are not moving around. Now, there are some options as you dive into the menu. You can choose to shoot anywhere between 2 and 7 frames, depending on what your needs are. You can shoot 3rd stops to 3 stop increments, depending on how wide of range of light you're trying to capture. And you can also use exposure compensation on top of all of this so that everything is brighter or everything is darker than normal. So there's a number of different options on there. So let's go ahead and run through a test. All right, so on our camera, I'm going to put up the camera into the aperture value mode because I think that's a good mode for using auto exposure bracketing. So I'm going to dive into the menu, and I need to get to the shoot menu, and we're going to go to shooting menu number 2. And that is right here. All right, so now exposure compensation and auto exposure bracketing are all kind of in the same one. If we go in here, we can turn the top dial to do our exposure bracketing. How big a bracket do we want to do? Usually I do at least a stop. You could do 2 stops or 3 stops. Let's do a stop here. Now, if you wanted to adjust the whole bracket left and right to make it all lighter or darker, you could do that. But I'm going to leave it right there in the middle. In fact, you know what? I'm changing my mind, and I can do that. I'm going to do a 2-stop bracket, and I'm going to hit set in here. And you can actually see it's set at -2, 0, and +2. And here in the viewfinder, you can see -2, 0, and +2. So when I take a photo, it's going to take the normal exposure first, and then it's going to take the dark exposure, which is listed right there. And then it's going to take the light exposure there. And when I play this back and I hit info, you can actually see down here at the bottom, +2, -2, and then our correct exposure. Now, something very important you want to know is go back and turn this off. when you're done, because you don't want to leave it there because all your photos will be messed up. So turn it on and turn it off only when you need it. All right, another way of dealing with difficult exposures is something called the high dynamic range mode. And this is where the camera shoots multiple photos, kind of like we just did in the previous topic, but then it combines all of them into one using its own computer magic in order to make something that keeps the highlights from one image and the shadow areas from another image and gets this wide range of tones all in one image. Now, normally you're going to want to leave this disabled. Does not work well with subjects that are moving around, doesn't work real well with hand holding the camera, but it actually does it okay. So leave it disabled most of the time. I have found doing the one-stop EV is a pretty small difference. You're probably going to want to go to 2 or the 3-stop EV settings if you're going to use it. Here's what it kind of looks like. And so if you have subjects in bright light and subjects in low light, it's going to be raising the shadows and trying to allow you to see those subjects that are in the darker portion of the frame. Now you can limit the max brightness, and this is going to be for certain types of monitors that you might use. Certain very good quality monitors might have a limited brightness, and if you're going to be using this HDR image on that particular device, you may want to disable it. It's generally not necessary in most situations. Continuous HDR I love, because what happens there is you press down on the shutter release and you hold down on it, the camera will fire through all the available needed shots in order to make that HDR series. And that way all the shots can happen in the shortest period of time. If you want to deliberately take one after another, you can do so with one shot. Auto image align. I don't like this, but I can see how some people might like this. It is designed for handheld photography. What it does is it crops in on the frame a little bit. It's like a 1.1 crop, and you don't get as much wide angle, but if you move, which you will do if you are hand holding the camera, it realigns everything for your final composite image. And so if you're trying to shoot handheld, turn it on. If you're on a tripod, turn it off. Finally, do you want to save the source images? Yes, you really do if this is important to you in any way, shape, or form. You can shoot raw, JPEG, or HEIF images to create the HDR image, but the final image you're going to get is a JPEG image, which is a bit limited in its own right. So just realize that going into this particular game. But if you are serious about capturing all the tonal information, I would definitely want to keep all of those images so that you could go back and access them and use post-production software beyond what the camera can do, and maybe do an even better job than what the camera is capable of, because it is somewhat limited when it comes to creating a great quality HDR right in camera. All right, there you go, folks. That is the exposure controls for the Canon R7. We're still at the tip of the iceberg for the most part. There is a ton more to come. The next 2 sections are particularly important on focus and the drive settings. They're the types of things that are going to control that you're going to want to control on a regular basis through regular shooting in here. But hopefully this gets you a great head start on with this camera. Lots more to come in the next sections.